morning and welcome back to Not So Grand Garage. I'm gonna start off with part 2 of the problems I've had over the years, the things I've learned. So let's dive right into it. Yesterday, I think we covered part 1. I think we covered picking up your oil, picking your oil sources, and the blending, a little bit of the processing. So I want to touch back on picking your oil sources. I've had a lot of questions about where I get oil from, and one of my biggest and best suppliers for me is local farmers, and they typically have to pay to have old oil picked up from them, or they have to haul it off to a facility and have to pay to dispose of it, because they'll end up, going through 300 gallon a year of hydraulic oil, motor oil, things like that. So they'll have to pay to haul it off. So if you get in a good relationship with your local farmers, you can save them money, and you can have a really good source of oil, typically, a tote or more a year. And see, I pick up from several different ones, so I've got pretty well got it lined out where I get several totes a year every year, so it works out really well, and it works out for them. We keep a good relationship. I get in, get out, no mess, no nonsense. So they know when I call, or when they call me, that I'll show up and I'll get them taken care of. That's important. So anyways, let's talk about oil storage and the problems I've had over the years with that. When I first got started, I just had a drum, and I didn't really have any issues with that except capacity. So I quickly outgrew that drum and went to an IBC tote. And they make different styles of those totes. They make ones that sit on pallets, which I'm not a fan of, and they make ones that have the thicker, like 3/4 inch diameter steel cage around them that's got the pallet built in. Those are the ones I typically try to get. They make those up to 330 gallon, which those are nice to get your hands on. They're a little taller than the standard ones, the standard 275 gallon version. You can get those from farm supply stores, or bulk oil suppliers will sell them used, typically for 30-40 bucks a piece, something like that. They're not outrageous. But yeah, issues I've had. I've learned the hard way on that you need to protect those IBC totes from the sunlight, because after a couple years in direct sunlight, they'll get really brittle, especially when they've got oil in them. So you can easily split the tank open, and when you've got a substantial quantity of oil in the tank and it splits, then you've got a big mess on your hands. So do yourself a favor and wrap your totes in black plastic and keep them out of direct sunlight, and that will keep them good for a long time. You shouldn't have to worry about them much. Also make sure there's no trees and what have you that can drop limbs and things like that on them. I've had that happen too, where I've lost it. Didn't lose what was in it, but knocked a big hole in the top of the tote, and then it rained and got water in the tote too, so that was a pain. Multiple times I've forgotten to put the lid back on the tote when I've gone out and I've dumped my drain pans or something like that into the container or into the top of the tote. Didn't think much about it, turned around and walked off with the lid still off of it, and wouldn't you know it, it rains. Now I've got water in the tank. So pay attention to what you're doing and remember to put the lid back on. Beyond that, there isn't much to talk about as far as storage is concerned. So, you know, if you, well, actually there is. If you live in the city limits, things like that, you need to be careful about how you go about storing oil and the quantities you store and everything else, because there's city regulations on how much you can have on hand. There's different fire codes and things like that may apply to you. So if you're going to ignore that stuff and keep a fairly large quantity, you need to be discreet about it. So you don't want to be having big tanks sitting around in your yard that your neighbors are going to be calling in and complaining about, and having you, or getting you some run-ins with the law. So just a little due diligence there. Keep everything cleaned up, be discreet about it, out of sight, out of mind, if you're gonna go that route. Or just be sure to look into the regulations and such that have to do with fuel storage and stuff like that in the city limits or wherever you're located. We're outside the city limits and we don't have neighbors super close, so we don't really have a problem there. Yeah. Let's see, what do we want to talk about next? Let's talk about driving style and tank system selection. So I learned this the hard way pretty well right off the bat when I started doing this. I had a very short trip to work, but I still wanted to play with alternative fuel. So I did it anyways in my Come and Swap Tahoe, which I'll be bringing on the channel here before too long. She's been parked for a good bit, but it's a 2003 Z71 Tahoe. It's got a 4BTA Cummins, compound turbos, water meth injection, yada yada yada. I wanted to run it on alternative fuel. I wanted to start learning, and that's the vehicle I had at the time that I was daily driving. But my drive to work was super short, and I didn't really think much about it. And back then, you could find paperwork, or you could find information from Cummins saying you could run X amount of used motor oil in your fuel without any problems. think it was 10% by volume, but it's been a while. So I started messing around with it, and I was just using filters and didn't know where my oil was coming from and everything else. And I was just dumping it in the tank, the single tank on my Tahoe. And for, you know, the first week, it wasn't bad, but I started noticing within, you know, a couple days, anytime it would sit at idle, it was hazing pretty good. And then it, after a few more days, it started to get kind of sluggish. Didn't really know what was going on at the time. And I tried different fuel system cleaners on it and things like that, and didn't seem to help any. And I had worked my way up to running 50% oil to diesel in the tank. So I finally broke down and pulled the injectors, which on that engine it's super simple. It takes, you know, a half hour to pull injectors out of it. When I'd pull them out, there'd be chunks of carbon hanging off the injector nozzle. I could clean that off with a brass wire brush or something like that. Throw new copper washers on the injectors, put them back in, they'd run great. No haze, no nothing. It would repeat this process once a week. And it just wasn't gonna work. So started cutting everything back, went back to straight diesel fuel on it. Because again, my trip to work was only 2 miles at the time. But I wanted to play with alternative fuel, so here we are. Well, then, a friend of mine got an IDI Ford, factory dual tanks on it. And he's like, you know what, I wanna try some of this too. So we kind of went in together and started running it on his truck. And he didn't have any issues. He didn't have any problems like I was having. But his short drives, he wouldn't switch tanks. He would stay on diesel fuel. And his drive to work was longer than mine, which makes a big difference. So what I've learned is that if you're going to be driving short distances at all, or idle time, you're going to be idling for any length of time, you really need a dual tank system. Because it doesn't matter how light the blend is in the tank, you're going to coke the injectors up, you're going to start hazing and everything else. Now I have found different things to combat this. Like in this car right now, I'm running 50-50 in it, which 50% W90, 50% pump diesel fuel, because I haven't set it up to twin tanks yet. And it starts on this mix great. It hazes a lot when it first starts, when it's cold. But as soon as it warms up, it runs clean. I've got water injection on it, which helps quite a bit. And I also run the snot out of this car pretty well anytime I drive it. My trip to work now is about 15 to 20 miles one way. So I got a good bit of highway driving between me and work. So I will make sure to put this thing down in third and pin it to the governor for quarter mile, half mile if I can, almost every trip. And that has gone a long way to keeping the haze away. you know, 1 WOT a day keeps the haze away. Isn't that cute? But yeah, so after seeing like the lack of issues his IDI was having, I decided to track one down. I need a crew cab, so that's when I bought the 90 Ford and set it up with dual tanks, and it's been great. Haven't had many issues out of it. It works really well. If I'm going to take a short trip, going to run down the road, go pick up dinner or something like that, leave it on diesel fuel, and you never notice the difference. It doesn't haze, doesn't smoke, just starts easy, runs good. And anytime, like if I drive it to work, or if we drive it going out of town, or coming into the city, go shopping, whatever, I will switch it over pretty well within a minute or so of starting it. I'll switch it over to oil, and no issues doing that. I'll switch it back to diesel fuel maybe half mile or so, a couple minutes before I get back home. Now if the truck's gonna sit and cool off, I'll switch it over during the day. But if I'm gonna go somewhere, park it, it's only gonna sit an hour, come back out and take off again, I don't even bother putting it back on diesel fuel. And it doesn't seem to mind that at all. But yeah, so if you're going to be doing any short driving, have a short drive to work, things like that, dual tanks, invest in it. There's a little bit of an expense to set it up, obviously, but it's really the best way to go about doing it if you can. If you've got a longer drive to work, you know, more than 4 or 5 miles, you're not going to be doing a lot of short trips back and forth to, you know, a mile or two. You're going to do a lot of idle time. You can get away with a single tank. And I've heard of a lot of people doing it without any issues at all, but that's not been my experience with it. Maybe they don't care about the haze and the smoke at all. I don't know, but let's see. Right now, that's all that's coming to mind, but I know this list is going to be longer than that, so I'm going to cut this off, call this the end of part 2. There will be a part 3 more than likely. I just got to sit down and think about it for a little bit. But yeah, if you haven't already, please subscribe, and we appreciate you watching.